So in the last video, we talked about placing an image by going to File, Place Embedded, and selecting an image, and clicking Place. In this video, we're going to talk about transforming that image. So there's a few different types of transformations. One of them is scaling, so making an image bigger or smaller. Another is rotating. And there are several others that you'll discover as we go through this tutorial. So at first I want to point out that there's a numerical way of doing this rather than me clicking and dragging. At the top of the screen, in your tool options bar, you have a W right here, that's the width, the height, and then this little degrees right here, that's the angle, the rotation angle. So for instance, right now my width is 28.1% of what the original image's width was, and the height is 27.1%. So for instance, I could type in 100, click on this and type in 100, and this will be at 100% the size of the original image. Let's say I know I need this image to be 10% its original size. I could type in 10, click over here and type in 10, and it's now at 10% of its original size. There's this little chain link button between this W, so again the W is width, the H is height. This little chain link, if I click that, see now it's enabled. I can click to turn it off, or I can click to enable it. This means that these will be tied together. So if I change the width, it'll also change the height. So for instance, if I type in 20, notice it changes the height to 20 as well. Now I would say 99% of the time you're going to want this chain link to be enabled because you're going to be transforming things in the same aspect ratio that they originally were shot at. So for example, I don't want to see images that look like this, right? This looks very bad, very amateur. But it's very common for beginning artists and beginning digital designers to not be aware of how skewing looks. So even a little slight skew like this, it still looks pretty natural, but a trained eye could see that there's some errors here and there. So you pretty much always want to keep these two numbers the same, so the width and the height scale at the same place. And the easiest way to do that is simply clicking the chain link. So if I click the chain link, again, it means that these will stay the same. So if I type in 25, 55, etc. So let's do 25. That seems like a good size. Over here we have the rotation angle, which right now, although it looks totally straight, it's actually not. It's off just a little bit, less than 1 degree. If I click and drag, you can see the rotation. I'll talk about these drag commands later. But the numerical command is really where the usefulness of this tool comes into play. So I'm going to type in 0, and that means it's perfectly straight. It's exactly how it was shot. If I type in 10, it's going to rotate it 10 degrees that way. 100, it's rotated 100 degrees that direction, so clockwise. 125, 25, 30. Some of the typical angles that you'll use that you might remember from geometry class would be 0, 45, 90, 180, right? So play around with these number values and you can maybe get a good result. Typically though, whenever you bring an image in, you're going to leave it at 0. Okay, so there was a more organic way of doing this, which was moving my mouse to the image and actually dragging these elements around. So these squares, there's a square in this corner, a square right here, square right here, square right here. Whenever we click and drag on these squares, it scales it. So each one changes the scale of our image. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to screw this up, right? If I just go like this, it's kind of hard to get this back to exactly the right size again. So one of the ways we could correct this is going up here and manually typing in, so let's say 20 and 20. And now it's back to normal. And if I click the link and I drag it from a corner, it actually stays in the same aspect ratio, meaning these numbers are exactly the same. But if I grab one of these midpoint squares, so either the one on the horizontal axis or the vertical axis right here, it turns that link off, stops being easy to scale. I'm going to type in 20 by 20 again. But there's another way, an easier way, rather than going up here and clicking this link, and that's by holding the Shift key. If I hold down the Shift key, it will not let me change the aspect ratio. So as I adjust the scale, meaning the size, as long as I'm holding that Shift key down, all right, it's good. So this is me holding the Shift key, and I'm clicking and dragging that square. Let's click and drag that square without holding the Shift key. And now here's holding the Shift key, and here's not holding the Shift key. All right, you can see the difference. So that Shift key is really useful, and you're going to see that with the rotation as well. So we've scaled to the right scale that we want it to be. This is pretty good. Now let's rotate it. So just like how we could grab these little squares in each corner and midpoint, if we move our mouse just slightly outside of that, it changes to a little rotation tool. See, it changes to an arrow on a kind of street turn. If I click and drag, I'm rotating it. Notice at the top of my screen that number's changing. So up here, the numerical value we were changing before is being changed as we drag it around. And again, all I'm doing is just moving my mouse slightly outside of the image, and it changes to this little U-turn, kind of turn signal, and I can drag that around. Now we have the same tool here, I'm going to set that back to 0, that we used on our scale by holding down Shift. If I hold down Shift and do this, it'll do it in 15-degree increments. Right, so this is really great for straightening out an image, or let's say I know I'm going to be using this upside down, or this way or that way. Just makes it really simple. So holding down the Shift key is a really powerful way to transform an image, but still keep it in its original kind of shape and dimensions. Now something else up here, we can type in, this is the actual position of the image within our document. So as you see, as I'm dragging it around and moving it, that pixel number is changing. This X right here refers to the X-axis. So if I drag it to the left, that'll go down. If I drag it to the right, that'll go up. The Y value here is referring to the Y-axis, right? So if I drag it up, it goes down, down it goes up. Now that can be a little confusing for people, but this is basically your kind of typical mathematical coordinate plane system that you might have seen in geometry or something like that, right? As we move this image around, so I'm going to go ahead and transform this. As we move this image around, you're going to see these values change. So if it was to be in this corner, see how it's getting closer to 0? Eventually it'll be 0, 0. Now it's measuring from the center point of my image, just a note there. In this corner, just take a guess before I get to it, is going to be 1920 by 1080, right? What we originally made our document to be. So if I wanted to find the center point, I could take 1920 and divide it by 2 and 1080 and divide it by 2. But Photoshop also is very helpful and will kind of snap our image there. So the center point would be 960 pixels by 540 pixels. So just a reminder, these values, X and Y, refer to the position. The W and H here refer to the scale, right? So the actual size, I'm holding down Shift, the actual size of our image. And this one is referring to the rotation of it. It's at 0. As we rotate it, it'll change. Okay. So these are the basic transformations, and we'll get into other transformations later. There's actually some really cool ones just to quickly show you. Things like doing a perspective warp, which can allow you to create some really cool effects. We'll get into these a little bit later. But for now, this is probably enough to sort of whet your appetite and get you into transforming and placing your images. One final note before I go, let's say we've transformed the image, so we've hit return or we've checked that box. So, right, we've finished transforming it. We've either hit the little check right here, or we've hit return or enter. We're done. How do we get back to that transformation menu? Well, there's a couple of different ways. One of those is to simply hold down Command and press T. On Windows, it would be Control and T. T as in transform. That brings up the transformation menu. We're able to transform the image again. Hit return and it's confirmed it. Another way is to go up to Edit, Free Transform. We'll do the same thing and allow us to transform it once again. So now that you have all these transform tools, really think about how scale and size and perspective can shift with these transformation tools, right? I'm hitting Command T to transform this again. You know, what's the difference in this image if I have this huge figure, right? Let's type in 100 by 100. Versus a smaller figure, like I did 50 by 50. Whoops, 150, 50 by 50. There you go. Right? How does the perspective and the sense of composition change through those transformations? Spend a little bit of time in Photoshop playing with these transformation tools. Again, that's hitting Command T to access those, or simply placing your image. And then see what you can do with them. See how you can shift the perspective on an existing photograph that you've downloaded from the internet, and how you can tonally change how the image presents itself.